right, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Bridget Howard, Senior Marketing Director for Concero Global. Concero Global is a leader of finance as a service. We take care of the back office finance and accounting so our clients can stay focused on growth. Today I'm joined by Steve Isom and David Dolmanet and Jessica Hamilton. Why don't each of you take a few moments to introduce yourself? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll go first. Steve Isom, I'm the CFO at Bloomerang. We're a vertical SaaS company that sells to small and medium-sized nonprofits to help with fundraising and donor relationships. I've been at the company for about 2 years. We're backed by JMI Equity, and I'm remote. I'm based out of Omaha, Nebraska. Company's based out of Indianapolis.
I'll go next. Hi there, my name is Jessica Hamilton. I'm the CFO and COO of Active Prospect Inc., headquartered in Austin, Texas. We are a MarTech company who services the online lead generation space. We help folks get their leads from wherever they gather them on the internet into their destination of choice and offer some filtering and distribution services as well. We are 130 employees strong, growing to 180, and we are a pretty small company, about 30 million of ARR, and we are backed by 5 Elms Capital out of Kansas City. David?
Excellent. Yeah, I'm David Dolmanet. I'm CFO of BryComm. We're actually headquartered up in Hutto, so a little north of Austin. We're about 250 employees. We are in the structured cabling space primarily in the construction industry. So commercial construction, we do structured cabling, security, audio, video, and we were number 8 on the Fast 50 last year. So similar, just growing really fast and trying to keep up. So I've been here about 4 months now. So
David is a new CFO. Not a new CFO, but a new CFO in his role. And some of these faces for our audience might be familiar because each of you have participated in Beer with the CFO, which is a thought leadership series that we produce. You'll see that on LinkedIn every week. And then we also have a YouTube channel that has collected all of our Beer with the CFO videos. So thank you to each of you for participating in that. So, we've had a lot of discussions together, but, change is something that CFOs are used to, but effectively managing through the difficult changes, it can lead to greater success. And Jessica, you and I had shared some stories about your growth during, the COVID era. And so you can have great success during a difficult time. In the current and forecasted economic climate, CFO should carefully evaluate cost containment leading up and during a downturn. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Steve, the first question I have is for you. With most economists predicting a slowing economy, we're all ready for that, possible recession. How can CFOs prepare and predict the impact of potential downturn?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the one thing that is clear is the era of free money is over. We rode that wave, and that's totally over at this point. And with that, really the mindset of growth at all costs is certainly, not the status quo anymore. But I think the one thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't mean growth isn't important. I think it's more so around efficient or durable growth. And I think that, one of the things for CFOs to really understand right now, one is there's a lot of talk, right, about softness in the market. And if you look at public companies, there's, Salesforce said they're not going to give guidance for 2023. There's a lot of negative signals, but I'd encourage all CFOs to look closely at their own demand signals, right? So, and understand what's actually happening in their business. So, Bloomerang is a vertical SaaS company selling to nonprofits. We are almost 100% inbound. So we look really, and we have short sales cycles. So we're closing deals in less than a month. So we manage and monitor kind of top of funnel metrics daily. So we are really on top of what's happening. And I think that you can, plan for the best, but expect the worst, or however that expression goes. And I think as you go into 2023, just scenario plan, right? So, hey, I think that, there's a pretty good chance that our business is going to hold up pretty resiliently in any type of downturn. but I need to have a really good handle on what happens if it doesn't. And then I think too, like, I think it's easy to kind of go into the mode of like, we just need to cut and cut. But, I think that you need to cautiously go into that exercise. A lot of the high growth SaaS companies, Salesforce in particular said that they really regretted how much they cut in 2009 because they weren't ready when the market bounced back. So I think keeping a really firm handle on your own demand signals is really going to steer you in the right direction.
So Steve, you want to throw out the multi-year plan that says the good times will keep rolling. Is that right?
We hope things don't get too bad, right? Or that our target market is somewhat more resilient. We do benefit from the fact that even in bad economic times, the United States is a charitable economy. So charitable giving as a percentage of GDP is really consistent. So you're really looking at macro trends, and we're feeling cautiously optimistic as we go into next year.
Good to hear. Jessica, and we're both, software services. You're more software than services, but we're software and services company over at Concero. So that growth at all cost strategy has definitely been in play. You're PE backed by 5 Elms, and we're also backed by private equity. So that strategy is being recalculated. How do you see this strategy evolving today? And kind of piggyback on the conversation that you and I have had in the past on giving investors meaningful data, measuring the right data, and how does Rule of 40 come into play here with your evolving strategy?
Yeah, definitely. It is interesting to see how it's evolved over the last 4 years. And I'll share 2 pieces of kind of some of the conversations Active Prospects is going through. So we currently are, like everyone else, probably in budget season. And it was really hard for us to get our budget approved for that reason. So absolutely profitability, line of sight into profitability, Rule of 40, more than ever, at least over the last 4 to 5 years, that balance, not the growth at all costs. What is the balance of growing with investing additional capital, mainly in sales and marketing and product and engineering? But we are also actively starting Series B conversations. So not only are we getting those questions in the boardroom and pressure more than ever to have that balance. And we're lucky, my CEO and I, this company was bootstrapped for the first 15 years of our 18-year life. So we both naturally are very cost conscious anyways. So we've always ran the business with the Rule of 40 in mind, even when our investors encouraged us not to. And so we're really glad that we've always kept that in mind, because now when we've had to cut back on some of our investment initiatives a little bit, we're fine and we're prepared. But I will say the Series B conversations are exactly going the same way, where it's not growth at all costs. It is more about the balance. Usually maybe conversations 2 or 3, you might get into some profitability, free cash flow conversations, break-even conversations. But now it's like the first conversation. Let's talk about growth. Let's talk about the product market fit. Oh, and also, how are you guys doing on the profitability front? So those conversations are happening, step 1, which further lets us know that the market has changed, the dynamics have changed, and we have to be prepared. So for us, absolutely, Rule of 40 is one that we're tracking pretty religiously. We're not going to hit it. So to Steve's point, we are not cutting all the way back to hit the Rule of 40. I think our plan for 2023 is Rule of 31. So still relatively healthy, but we were not comfortable making any more cuts. So that's a big one for us.
Thank you. Yeah, and in our audience today, it was interesting to look at the RSVP list. We have over 100 RSVPs for this event. We have a lot of CEOs, CFOs, a lot of investors on the call, but we do have a good portion of CEOs who are managing the finance function because they're still in that early stage. Can you explain the Rule of 40 to all of us?
I sure can. Absolutely. So the formula for the Rule of 40, first of all, it's just supposed to be an indicator of the balance of revenue growth and profitability. So it is the revenue growth you will have for a period, plus the EBITDA loss, or if you're profitable, good for you, positive EBITDA, and then what you want is that equation to get to equal 40. So for us, we're going to be growing 40-ish% ARR top line, but if we're going to lose 8%, so we hit a rule of 31, 32. So That is what it is supposed to be, so that you have that good balance of not having revenue growth at all costs. Because if you're just losing a bunch of money but growing 100%, it may not be a good sign of a viable long-term business.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, clarifying that for us. David, so interest rates are at the highest point they've ever been in 20 years. How do you lower, in fact, I think the last time you and I spoke, the variable rate on your debt was 7%. I don't know if that's changed since that last conversation, but how do you lower expenses at a time when the cost of your debt is increasing each quarter?
Yeah, I mean, so part of that conversation, and yeah, unfortunately, they've continued to go higher thanks to the continued inflation and the Fed Open Market Committee continuing to increase interest rates. And one of the interesting parts of that and managing through that is most of the folks on my team and even some of the folks on the executive team, their entire careers, the interest rates have been basically near zero. So when you don't have a cost of capital, or when your cost of capital is near zero, you don't have to make those decisions in terms of time value of money. It essentially, it puts a finer point on some of the decisions and some of the cost management. The specific or most tactical response that we've had to that is I manage my cash position a lot tighter in trying to manage my line of credit balance, because my interest expense has more than doubled. So if I continue to use that line of credit or leave it in place and maintain a higher cash balance, then I'm paying a significant amount every month in interest. That wasn't the case previously. And at any point during the cycle, during the business cycle, we try to make investment decisions based on the highest return, obviously. So that doesn't change even when we're looking at downturns and trying to make decisions and trying to manage cash tighter than we normally would. And it's that takes on a finer point essentially of, hey, do we really need to make this investment, because the implication of that from a tactical perspective, from a near-term perspective, has a higher cash impact because of those higher interest rates. So it puts a bit of a finer point on it, and it makes everybody pay a bit more attention than just, like we said, hey, the good times are here. There is no cost to this debt essentially, or there's no cost to this decision. So we're going to go continue to drive growth. So it makes us pay a bit more attention, one, to our cash balance and manage a tighter cash balance, so that we're managing our line of credit a bit more tightly. It puts and obviously the things that play into that, we put a greater focus on our cash cycle and trying to manage our inventories a bit tighter, manage our DPO and DSO, to just manage the cash a bit more focused than we would otherwise in that grow at all costs environment. So
yeah, we're all certainly starting to hear the messaging shift a little bit. And Steve, I've experienced this with Kinsera. I've been with them for going on 10 years, and so the pace has always been a very fast-paced, high growth. My career has been in that climate, accelerated growth. And so how can finance leaders effectively explain to the executives and the workforce, how rising interest rates and cheap capital going away will impact high growth tech businesses?
Yeah, I mean, David kind of alluded to this, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's not just individual contributors on the team. There's a lot of executives who haven't experienced it. I mean, over the last, the boom that we've experienced, there's the meme that stocks only go up, right? And people have never seen logging into their 401k and see the balance go down over any meaningful period. So I think one is employees are probably starting to feel it in certain aspects of their life. But I think that what I tried to do and my team did, and we started with the leadership team, is we explained at a really basic level how interest rates impact both cost of capital and basically getting to the point of, and for all the finance nerds out there, you'll appreciate this, like we literally walked the team through like a DCF and understanding, okay, when you talk about valuing growth, what was the assumption that investors are making, right? And investors are making the assumption that all of the value is in the terminal value, right? And you're assuming that you're going to burn cash for the next 3 to 5 years, and then in that terminal value into perpetuity is where you're going to generate all your returns. And to David's point is when that cost of capital is going up substantially, all of a sudden the time value of money and the present value of those future cash flows really change. So then the math on what that company is worth changes quite a bit. And we certainly even had people on our leadership team was like, oh, I never really thought about how those things were connected. I just thought investors valued businesses based on ARR growth now, and not maybe making the leap of, at least from an academic standpoint, what you're trying to get to and valuing it on that top line growth. So I think understanding and running that through the business, we also have debt in our business too. We put the debt facility, we have a term loan and revolver, we put that into place with really low interest rates. And it wasn't even a question around debt versus equity. It's, of course, we're going to do debt. There's hardly any covenants. We have ultimate flexibility, and it's so cheap. Well, like David, like our interest rate has doubled over the last year. And all of a sudden, we're having a conversation around, okay, we can talk about the operating margins of the business, and then we can talk about what the financing costs are. And I think we've started to talk about those two things as separate because we've made decisions about the capital structure of the business that, assuming we don't refi or take it out, it's just the cost that we're going to have to figure out. So we're getting much tighter and instructing people to get much tighter on the things we can't control because we can't control interest rates, and we can't control Fed decisions, right? So really focusing on what's controllable.
Wonderful. I'll pause there for a moment just to remind the audience that we're going to have this roundtable discussion for about another 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to your important questions that you have for this strategic CFO panel. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and Allison will join us at the end and bring your questions forward. So thank you. David, can you talk through the budgeting process and philosophy on expense management?
Yeah. And you said we have 10 minutes? So let me share a couple of cliches that I've learned throughout my career. All models are wrong, some are useful, right? And be approximately right, not precisely wrong. So as finance professionals, we like to get and build models, right? A budget is simply a model that's based on a lot of different assumptions. And the way that, so a couple of things from a philosophical perspective that are applicable to all companies as they do budgeting. I like to do scenario planning, right? And a budget, the eventual agreed scenario that we think is going to happen next year is one of several scenarios that we try to model as we go through the budgeting process. And doing that, I like to look at, well, here's kind of steady state. If things were consistent as they have been historically, and that kind of gives you the midline, right? Well, what if we experience a significant acceleration in growth, and how do we adapt our business to go deliver on that increased revenue growth? Also, what if we see a significant downturn or a significant reduction in the revenues that we've been delivering? How do we adjust and adapt our cost structure to respond to that and still try to maintain profitability, or at least mitigate to the extent possible the impact of that downturn, right? So those are the three scenarios, and we typically, you have a budget, which is a locked-in agreement of what we think is going to happen. And I've had a lot of mentors over the years, Joel Trammell being one of them here in town, and he always said, don't have any good ideas in the second half of the year because it's not in the budget, right? So what I try to tell my teams, even though we've locked in a budget, the first answer is never no. So whether it's operations or sales or whoever comes to me and says, hey, we want to do this, or we want to try this, the first answer is never no. We just have to quantify and understand the impact that has on the business and the priorities that we've set and what that means in terms of shuffling some of those priorities. Yes, we can go invest in additional developers, but that means I've got to try to take some money out of the marketing budget. So let's go have that conversation as an executive team, prioritize that. And again, because of the higher cost of capital, that puts a finer point on some of those decisions, and the tactical and the time frame within which we can have an impact with those things. That return may not be until the middle of the following year. So I can't take that incremental risk this year, given how thin our growth is, or how thin we're trying to manage cash. So that's kind of the the philosophical approach to budgeting. From a tactical perspective on expense management or expense control, that goes to, obviously we look at discretionary first. And that is, okay, we put a hiring freeze in place. We look at our marketing spend. And again, with the understanding that, guys, this is not, there is not no impact of these things. We've just got to try to quantify and understand where those impacts and the extent of those impacts and when they're going to hit us. So yeah, I can turn marketing off, but that means, Steve made the comment, right? We manage top of the funnel really closely. I don't, because my sales cycles are sometimes years long, and my project and delivery cycles are years long because I'm a construction business. So it's easier for me to turn off marketing and go, yeah, we'll deal with the impact that has on my revenue 2 years from now, but it's not a zero impact. So again, we've got to quantify and try to understand the impact of those things. That, yeah, I can save $50,000 next month by not going to this trade show, but let's all agree there's not a zero cost to that a year and a half from now. So it's just trying to understand and help. Again, Steve, you mentioned, trying to educate the whole executive team of the implications of some of the decisions that we're driving. The current environment puts a higher focus on those things. So that's kind of the, hey, here's the philosophical part of that, and here's the tactical, how do we manage through those things?
Great conversation. Thank you for that. You and Jessica are both in Austin. You mentioned Mr. Trammell, who's also in Austin and kind of an Austin icon. And Jessica, both of you are members of the CFO Leadership Council, which is a great organization led by Jack McCullough, a good friend of Concero. And you recently presented, Jessica, on a panel about hiring and retaining talent. Talent is one of the biggest costs of doing business, right? Could you share some of your insights and advice on that subject?
Sure.
The cost of talent certainly isn't going down. We know that. So how do you balance all of that?
Definitely. And on the panel that we discussed, I did preface that some of my opinions and active prospect practices may be slightly unpopular, but they've been what have worked for us. So we decided as a team not to engage in the wage war. So when wages started really increasing extraordinarily, we had several team members, like I think most companies have, who left for opportunities, really flat opportunities for more income. You can't fault employees for that. But for us, we did not play the match the higher offer game. So we did lose higher number of team members in 2022 and quite frankly, 2021 than we had expected. But for us, we have done a lot of succession planning. So we had a bench prepared. And so for us, we've had to get really creative. And some of the things that we've learned the hard way over the last year is that we're 100% remote, I should say, and that was because of the pandemic. Before that, we were remote friendly, but we always had a large group of our employees in an Austin office. Now we are 100% remote first. And what we have learned is that the happy hours and the virtual games and all that stuff that were real popular coming out of the pandemic, the employees were not valuing that. For us, the employees value flexibility. So we have a huge flexible policy about the hours that you work. We have a great combination of moms and dads and partners and all kind of different relationships at the company. And we don't care who you are and what role you play in your family. If you need to be at the bus stop at 3:30, put it on your calendar and go be at the bus stop at 3:30. And that has gone a long way. So all of our culture surveys and things that we get back, our highest ranks are on our flexibility. And it doesn't mean that we're being walked all over. It's still the expectation of putting in a solid work week, but with the hours that make sense for you. And then also career development. So we use a combination of Lattice and Bamboo HR, and we have really put a lot of resources into building out career ladders and where can your career go here at Active Prospect. When you're not in an office, it's hard to kind of see how all the different departments play together and what the opportunities are to grow. So we have made that crystal clear within our career development platform. And then also getting creative on the perk side. So we had experimented, we actually acquired a company, and one of the perks that they had were this $100 a month spend on really any sort of wellness. But the catch is you have to put a picture in Slack. And it's one of our favorite Slack channels.
Great.
It's very cool. And the company gets credit for it because they're like, thank you, Active Prospect, for this amazing perk and showing a picture at the gym or reading books.
Right.
So we're rolling that out to all of our employees for next year. And that's very expensive, $100 a month per employee. That adds up fast, but it's the way that we had to really take care of our employees that we have on staff first before we talk about trying to match the market. But what you said, Bridget, we are seeing salaries cool off. So I think with the unfortunate layoffs that have happened in big tech, we are starting to see that a little bit cool off in our recruiting cycles. And so for us, we're going to wait. We're going to wait and pick up our recruiting in Q1, let some of the dust settles from some of these layoffs that are happening. And we feel like the balance of salaries and skill set will kind of be back in the company's court a little bit more than it has in the past.
That's good to hear. And that incentive program, you didn't need to, bring on any other outside software to manage that type of program. So there was no added expense.
No added expense. And we were actually able, and I would encourage everyone to do this. We looked at all the perks we've been offering over really the greater part of the last 8 years. We were actually able to fund 40% of this new benefit by getting rid of some of the old benefits that just weren't working anymore. Like we had like I said, the happy hours, the different things we used to put money towards, we've just moved that all over to this benefit. And we're really going to be encouraging our employees to use it.
Smart. I like that idea. Steve, cutting overall operating expenses is going to be top of mind for many finance executives going into 2023. How can execs get a handle on current spending while also planning for long-term business growth?
Yeah, I think that it's a hard balance for sure. But I think for us, we're probably guilty of it like a lot of other high growth software companies, is we really let software expense internally and tools get a little bit away from us. And I think that we weren't really doing a good job of looking at utilization and then also some form of ROI, like it not, are we using it and are we getting the value from it that we expect? So I think from a general like procurement and vendor management perspective, we've certainly got tighter. We partner with a company called Vendor to do that. And then I think that we didn't go, I won't say that we went straight to zero-based budgeting, although I know that's coming back in vogue here, given the economic times, but we did really go vendor by vendor with leaders and say, okay, are you using this? Is this critical from a long-term perspective? And we realized, that we had overlap across departments, of project management tools. If we just standardize on one tool, we'll get better pricing. And they tended to be the long tail of the tools, right? But the long tail sort of added up. So software expense was a really easy one for us to look into. And then, as Jessica has mentioned, we're really trying to focus more on like the higher impact things for our employees. So like, again, like the happy hours and another t-shirt, like people don't necessarily care, but we just did something really unique. So again, we're in the nonprofit space. So Giving Tuesdays, the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving, we partnered with a vendor called Uncommon Giving, and we basically seeded all of our employees with a giving account and basically gave them $100 to donate to nonprofits of their choice. And exactly like Jessica mentioned, we had a Slack channel that was just everyone posting, here I took my $100 and I split it across 5 organizations. Here's what they do. And I can't believe Bloomerang did this, especially with everything going on in the world. And, if you think about, okay, we had 300 plus employees, it's a little over 30,000, like the amount of uplift you get from that investment, whereas like you can cut some really maybe dumb spending elsewhere and the business really paid off for us. So thinking more about impact as opposed to, well, we've just always done that, I think can be a good place to look.
I love that idea. And Concero actually experienced that in the past as well. We've kind of always done an annual charitable campaign, but this past year we actually had team members who were impacted by the horrific hurricanes in Southwest Florida. And so, there was some devastation that needed to be put back together. And we decided to come together as a family and donate to that cause and help our team member in that way. And then the executive team at Kinsero decided to match all the contributions. So, you know, that makes you really feel good and makes you really appreciate your team members and see how you can impact their life. So great suggestion. So David, back over to you. Of course, times of uncertainty can leave the workforce feeling a little overwhelmed, a little stressed. How can leaders promote a positive environment and increase morale? And I'm going to point back to that book that you suggested when you and I met and filmed a Beer with a CFO episode, The Happiness Advantage by Sean Anker. That might be in part of your answer. We'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, the fastest way to increase morale is just to fire all the unhappy people. we're in the process of doing that now. It's working out really well now. So no, so it becomes even more challenging. And I guess, honestly, all of the conversations that we're having are great practices and discipline to apply no matter where you are in the business cycle, right? It's not like we can start doing things harder when things are tough. Again, it requires a little bit more focus sometimes, and this is a perfect example of that. What I try to do with my teams all the time, no matter what the market conditions are, is to give them the autonomy to make decisions, right? My job, or our jobs as executives, is to kind of set the vision and to give them the resources and the autonomy to make the decisions to get there as fast as they can. I don't like to, I never micromanage my teams to go, well, this is the way we need to do this, this, and this, and then you do this and come back and see me. This is where we're trying to get to, right? You tell me the best way to get there and the resources that you need to go accomplish that. So that works all the time. And it especially works or insulates teams when times are bad, right? Because I trust my team, and I tell them that all the time. I trust you to do your job. And part of that, you know, Jessica and Steve both have mentioned, right? I don't care when that happens, right? It's the antiquated thought of, well, that has to happen between 8 and 5, giving them that autonomy and that flexibility to accomplish those things whenever they need to, however they need to, or however they feel best, is really empowering and really helps morale, right? And that is somewhere along the lines, and you know, to go back to the book, and I'm blanking, it's a Daniel Pink book, and I think it's called Mastery, actually. Could be wrong. But Sean Anker's book, The Happiness Advantage, is basically the fact that, especially in America, we're like, well, once we're successful, then we'll be happy. And that really is backwards, right? It's happiness breeds success. So it's not, hey, we need to come in, and again, being new to my role, I'm here now, I think 100 days. It's not, well, we need to get all of these things fixed, and then we'll be able to be satisfied and happy. It really is looking at it going, hey, we need to have fun. We do this way too much, right? If we're working 50, 60-hour weeks because of the situation and because of some of the resource constraints that we're operating under, I need to focus on people's well-being and happiness, and then we'll start to deliver on the results. Not, we've got to hammer these things and get this stuff done. Then we'll be able to be, you know, take a breath and be happy. So it's just kind of trying to manage that, especially now when things, you know, the look at the macro environment and the stresses that the world has been through over the last couple of years, and you know, it just continues to compound. Oh, by the way, now we're in a war in Europe, and oh, by the way, now the world economy is not looking so great, and that list will be forever going. It's just, you know, focus on the well-being of your team, and part of that is helping make sure that they're happy and they're in a good place.
I've got two teenage daughters, David, and every morning I wake up and tell them happiness is a choice.
Absolutely. Right.
Today
exactly.
is your happy day. Make it happen. We'll have one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience to put your questions. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Steve, I've got a question for you. You know, it's a strange time with companies trying to lower operating costs, but also struggling to attract and retain talent, you know, during a shortage. This kind of ties into Jessica's question that she answered. This may be leading some CFOs to consider outsourcing. And I know, Steve, you know, you were a Kinsero client when you were with Flywheel. Flywheel had a successful exit to WP Engine, so you have a lot of experience in that regard. So considering the outsourcing route for finance and accounting responsibilities, what should finance executives consider when deciding whether or not to outsource part of the finance function?
Yeah, I think that the way that I thought about it, and I've thought about it before, is one, well, what's the specific situation you're put in? And I think in the flywheel case study, right, talks about I joined the company and there was one kind of bookkeeper, accounting manager, and she resigned. And so needed to make sure that payroll was done and vendors were paid and the books were closed. So had a really acute problem and knew that I wasn't going to be able to recruit, a high quality candidate or candidates in a short period of time. So went with Kinsero. And then I think the other piece is that, so you find yourself, fighting this talent war, and maybe you lose someone who goes and gets an offer you can't match. I would really consider looking at someone like Kinsero. And then the other thing is, you can choose what you give, right? So like what we did is we kind of kept FP&A in-house, and then day-to-day accounting we outsourced. And it was a really good balance. And we treated the Kinsero team, I'll always say this, like they were part of the team. We did weekly stand-ups. We gave them updates on how the business was performing. And it really led to a cost-efficient model with folks that were just as good, if not better, than full-time employees. And largely because we treated them like they were a part of the team. But it's definitely a viable option, especially if you're dealing with sudden change and need to troubleshoot.
Wonderful. Let's see, I think we have a question coming in through the chat. Allison, could you guide us through the Q&A?
Yeah, so it looks like this first one's for Jessica. Raising a Series B requires significantly more accounting and finance efforts on top of general growth. How are you managing growing your team, tools in a cost-saving environment when the finance organization is usually last to be fed?
Yeah, no, great question. So we thankfully, going through our Series A just 3 years ago, we have a lot of that scar tissue, so we kind of know what to expect better now. I did hire my first full-time FP&A person last year. So I will say if it was not for that hire, I would not be going through this Series B right now, because we do not need the cash. We're really looking more for a partner. So we've got some different motivations to go out to market at the moment. But for us, it's all about the prioritization. So to your point, right now, we're laser focused on the budget process, getting that through the board. It was approved yesterday, our budget for next year. So now we're kind of looking forward to say, okay, now let's really double down on the Series B conversations, but also not wasting our time. So having done this for 15 years and raised almost 50 million in capital, I don't share information or respond to data room requests for partners that we don't think could really be a potential good fit for us. So just saying no and being comfortable with that is something that is uncomfortable at first. But for me right now, I'm not using an investment banker, so it's all me. And for the Series A, we also did not use an investment banker. So I just put guardrails up if I know that it's not going to be a good fit for our market. But it takes some diligence. And real quick on the FP&A person, I found that person on Upwork.com. And I talked about this. I talked about this at the panel discussion. A gentleman that was working for a PE type firm out of the UK. He's kind of a nomad, wanders around the world, and have a very reasonable salary for him to work for me full time. And he has been amazing. So once again, getting creative with how do we find talent? Because when I started looking for an FP&A person and got our applications in here, US based, especially in Austin and San Fran, it was absolutely not. I can't afford these salaries. And I'm so happy with opening up my appetite for unusual work arrangements. And I found a full-time contractor that is amazing and onboarded super fast. So just quick plug for Upwork.com if you've never looked there before. Thanks, Allison.
We've had a couple of great suggestions on this call for, I think it was Vendor, Steve, that you used, and HR Bamboo. Did I get that right? HR Bamboo, Jessica?
Yep, Bamboo HR and Lattice.
Bamboo.
We like Lattice for our performance management. Bamboo HR is another HR tool, but we use both, but we use Lattice for performance management.
Wonderful. I use Upwork all the time and they're fantastic. The deliverables that I get from the contractors that I've leveraged has always been really great. So Same. Good stuff.
Great. And then I think we have time for one more quick question. David, I'll pose this one to you. How is everyone approaching compensation next year, given inflation, but also the macro environmental constraints? How are you approaching increases / promotions among current employees, as well as comp for new hires? So a couple questions there if you want to tackle.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And we've been, I don't want to say struggling, but it's definitely been a more challenging issue this year than in prior years, because like we said, it is a weird environment given the labor market and how tight the labor market is, compounded by inflation and people going, hey, if I'm not getting 8.2%, I'm taking a real pay cut essentially in terms of my purchasing power. And then also looking at a reduction or a challenging headwinds from a macroeconomic perspective and potential slowdown in our revenue growth. So it's been, again, kind of a tighter focus and just trying to manage through. And again, I'll talk out of both sides of my mouth. It's something that we try to do all the time or every year anyway, is really look at the people that are key to what we're trying to accomplish and the folks that are having the greatest impact, and how do we continue to get them. So we do the forced rankings and just kind of some standard HR stuff. And then how do we look at and how do we fund the pool of what is affordable from an increase perspective, and then use the performance measures to kind of divvy that out and look at who are the most critical members of the team. How do we take care of them? I like to also use variable compensation as a way to continue to give people increases, because then that's sharing, and I can't call it profit sharing, right? But that's a way to share the success of the company in their overall comp. And it helps them understand, yeah, it's not just always, like we said, before, hey, my 401k balance always just goes up, my salary just keeps going up. It's a way to look at it and go, hey, I'm growing your overall comp, your target comp. But that's predicated on the continued success and growth of the company that you have a hand in creating and realizing. So sharing the success of the company and helping them understand that they've got a vested interest in the continued success of the company, because it impacts their bottom line as well.
And Allison, I wouldn't mind jumping in on that question as well. It's such a great question. And I'm in a bunch of networking groups and this one comes up. It seems like we're still all budgeting, anywhere between 3.5% on the low end, up to 8% on the high end for pay increases. Active prospect, we landed at about 4.5%, and that's about where most of the portfolio companies for 5 Elms Capital ended as well. And so we're not budgeting the 6 to 8%. And as David mentioned, extending the variable comp conversation. So historically, variable comp has only been eligible for senior management and above. And now we're looking for more, lower in the organization. Where does it make sense to perhaps offer variable compensation, outside of sales and client success management? Of course, that's always been variable comp related, to see what we might do there. The other thing on the promotion side is looking in-house. If you guys do not do this, we have a head of HR who makes us go offsite every June and evaluate everyone at team lead and above for succession planning, and to identify where could these folks go in the organization if like a worst case scenario happened and we lost a lot of our top talent. And so what we are doing is, before we go out and try to hire from outside of our walls, we are looking within to say, who can we promote up? Maybe they're really 12 months out, but let's go ahead and take the risk. Can we go ahead and get them in some people management training, and maybe give them a couple of projects to test out whether or not we can go ahead and promote early and keep that knowledge in-house and give that person the at-bat. So those are two ways at Active Prospect we are addressing both of those. So 4.5% merit increases kind of across the board on average, and then really looking from within on promotions, and then using that variable comp trigger when we need to.
And you mentioned networking, Jessica, so important. We're sharing this great thought leadership, but connecting with each other, finance leads and both David and Jessica are part of the CFO Leadership Council Austin chapter, and great content coming out of that organization. They're in almost every major city, so I encourage everyone on the call to get connected to the CFO Leadership Council and network with your peers. All right, thank you each and every one of you for joining us today. We'll close it out. Appreciate your time and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.